The other day, I was watching a video from Talia Is Not Cool titled "Your Life as an Accidental AI Slop Consumer." It was a well done video. So well done, in fact, that it left me questioning something that maybe you've also wondered at some point, which is, where did the word slop as a popular internet phrase even come from anyways? One simple Google search led to days of reading and research, falling down a rabbit hole that took a much darker turn than I was expecting. Welcome to Salted Latte, a place where I like to yap about words and prose, usually related to books, but today we're going to be pursuing something a little different. I'll be sharing everything I learned about the term slop and its frankly disturbing origins through what I am calling the slop etymology iceberg. If you aren't familiar, etymology is a linguistic term that follows the history and evolution of a specific word or phrase. So we'll be peeling away the layers of the term slop one at a time, starting all the way back in the 15th century. As far as we know, the word slop as a noun has been around in some definition since the 1400s, first being cited in an exceptionally long poem titled Mort Arthur, which detailed the final days of King Arthur's life. In this context, it was likely used in reference to soft mud or muddy water. Slop can also be traced back to the Old English word cuslip or cowslip, which is now the name of this cute yellow flower. But centuries prior, somewhere between the 5th and the 12th, it was also a term used to refer to cow poop. So in this sense, the meaning of slop had expanded to include anything slippery and gross you wouldn't want to step in, not just mud. During this time, there had also been some instances of slop being used in words that refer to loose-fitting garments, or as a verb meaning something adjacent to the act of lapping up, like a kitten lapping up milk from a bowl. Those variations were not nearly as prevalent as the slippy, mud-like material that I first mentioned. We don't really see any notable derivative of slop being used aside from these examples until the 17th century, where it's incorporated into words like slip-slops or simply slops, to mean a tasteless food or medicine. It's likely that through this variant we began using slop as a way to refer to the stale food scraps fed to animals like pigs who seem happy to munch on a diet of garbage and even leftovers of themselves, according to some homesteaders. Fast forward to the 21st century, and this brings us to our most recent definition of slop, a digital content of low quality that is produced usually in quantity by means of artificial intelligence, says Merriam-Webster Dictionary. Content on the internet that is of very low quality, especially when it is created by artificial intelligence, says Cambridge Dictionary. And as someone on Reddit so poignantly puts it, low-quality garbage. This definition rose to prominence in the 2020s with the rise in accessibility of generative AI to the everyday person, but it's not actually the birthplace of slop as an internet term, like most people would assume. The usage of slop in reference to AI media was thought to have been coined first by British programmer Simon Willison. He certainly was an early adopter of the term, advocating for its usage just before it went mainstream over the past couple of years. However, a certain group of people had been using variations of the term slop for almost a decade prior. To uncover modern slop's true origins, you must dive deep into the lolcat corner of the chronically online world. You need to visit 4chan. If you're familiar with the brony fandom, rickrolling, or this meme format, then congratulations. 4chan has infiltrated your feed at some point or another, whether you realized it or not. This primarily image-sharing website has contributed greatly to the shaping of internet meme culture. In the case of something like rickrolling, it's a bit annoying but ultimately harmless. However, there is a pervasive side to 4chan that is much more disturbing, and unfortunately, that cesspool is the next stop on our journey down the slop etymology iceberg. One of the most popular posting boards on 4chan is called Politically Incorrect, or POL for short, which in recent years, since about 2022, has grown to become a hub for some pretty nasty stuff, perpetuated under the guise of opinions that just so happen to be outside of the status quo. Think political takes and language someone would whine about other people finding quote-unquote offensive. I don't personally love the use of offensive in this scenario because I feel that it puts a lot of emphasis on the other people who have valid reason to be getting upset and not enough emphasis on the people that are spewing this politically incorrect take or takes. To me, it comes across as another way to police other people's reactions, thus shielding these bigoted people from ever facing consequences of the beliefs they hold and how they share them. I'm simply using it here because this is how many of these kinds of people view that situation. They are entitled to being hateful online, and if anyone has a problem with it, then those people are the problem. Because it's a free country, First Amendment rights, America, rah! Except this isn't America, it's the internet, and those laws don't apply in the same way, but they don't actually care about that, just like they don't actually care about free speech if it's something they don't agree with or directly conflicts with the often conservative and evangelical beliefs they grew up indoctrinated into. But we don't have time to get into all of that right now. Back to slop. An excerpt from the study Shades of Hatred Online, 4chan Memetic Duplicate Circulation Surge During Hybrid Media Events gives a great example of the kind of environment that this branch of 4chan specifically, but really 4chan as a whole in modern day fosters. It says, quote, "While 4chan promotes free speech, it has been known for increasing radicalization, which has received extensive coverage in the US media. Controversial media coverage of the site can be reflected through Brian Feldman's quote that called Poll out as, quote, the site's most toxic community, as well as increasingly and bizarrely influential in online supremacist politics. In 2014, before the surge in popularity of the poll discussion board, 4chan was already known as an arena of different forms of toxicity. It is currently considered to be a forum for right-wing contrarianism, extremism, and user mobilization. Aside from studies, of which there are many, the impact of this politically incorrect group has been reported on in the media for years, and is even prominent enough to have its own fully fleshed out Wikipedia page outside of the original 4chan one. I read through this particular study, which I will link below, along with all of the other sources that I use for this video if you want to check them out. And what they discovered about the kinds of people who frequent the poll board was alarming, but not surprising. The 2 points most related to what we are discussing today are as follows. The first being self-labeling as supremacist was consistent across the datasets, indicating that such users represent the culture of this community and that users were explicit about it. Now, they also add on to this point stating that the creation of character-based archetypes and these kinds of labels is common on the poll board and in 4chan in general, which makes this online space semi-performative and semi-authentic. And I don't know if I entirely agree with that. I think that what the authors of the study are getting at here is that 4chan is an anonymous site. There are no real names used, so users choose parts of their personality or beliefs to identify as. Even if that's not all of them, that is still part of their identity in real life too. You don't just label yourself as a supremacist for laughs. A lot of people on the right use this idea of satire and irony as a shield from criticism and from taking any accountability for the real harm that they perpetuate. Again, you don't frequent or participate in sites like these in general as an edgy joke. It's not countercultural or cool to be racist, anti-Semitic, homophobic, misogynistic, etc., etc. But moving on, the second point that they found was that anti-Semitism in particular was widespread and not only expressed in relation to the events they studied that directly correlated with Jewish people or Jewish temples. Thus, anti-Semitism seems to be a big agenda item on 4chan. So this group of people hold these supremacist ideas and they are unafraid to post them online as well as self-identify with these far-right groups because under this posting board, that is the norm. Bigotry is the basis for their community. And like most communities, they have created special ways to communicate, including in-group language and slang to further strengthen that bond. Can you see where this is going? If not, don't worry, I will explain. In an article by the New York Times titled "First Came Spam, Now with AI We've Got Slop," linguist Adam Alexic says, quote, What we always see with any slang is that it starts in a niche community and then it spreads from there. Usually this is out of coolness or necessity. He uses the term spam as an example of slang derived from coders out of a shared need to name the phenomenon of excessive, unsolicited emails and texts that came along with the rise of technology and the internet. And just like spam, there is a growing need to identify generative AI in particular, especially that of lower caliber. Ignore that email, it's spam, and ignore that article or picture, it's slop, Adam argues, are both useful lessons. I do agree that we need a simple term to label generative AI, one that reflects its poor quality and its dangers. However, what we are about to get into does have me questioning, should we be pushing so hard for the adoption of a word with such violent origins? And regardless of if it's right or wrong to use this word, is it already too late to remove slop from the everyday person's vocabulary? The first time that slop is believed to be used as a slang term on the internet is in August of 2016, where a 4chan user manipulated its original 15th and 17th century meanings into something much more sinister. This comment was posted on the international board, and it's made in reference to the fast food chain In-N-Out Burger, where they refer to the food as, quote, greasy G-slop food. A few years later, this term also sprouted up on the poll board that we've been discussing. For example, in May of 2019, a user commented in reference to a post about Burger King stating, implying I care about what G-slop companies do. Then in November of that same year, another user on the same board said, quote, how can you have a functional society when you are willing to feed kids and youth G-slop? No wonder they're having depression, mental breakdowns, and violent outbursts, in reference to the quality of American school lunches. The phrase grew from there, really taking off around 2022, amassing thousands of search results on 4chan, specifically via the politically incorrect board, and also spreading to other sites like iFunny through meme format. You might have noticed that I am censoring this slop-related term, and that is because I'm not sure if I am allowed to say it entirely or not. And we will get into the semantics of that soon. It is a little tricky to find an authentic definition of this term though, so I'm going to try my best to create one myself by culminating a bunch of different Urban Dictionary entries and Reddit posts. G-slop, aka the premise that there is a greater conspiracy perpetuated by the people in power, which users of this term claim is the Jewish population, to consistently quote-unquote feed us with substandard food, media entertainment, and other products to encourage mindless consumption on a mass scale. Examples of what someone would consider G-slop are as follows: politically correct, often liberal and left-wing ideology, cheaply made single-use products, any variety of processed or fast foods, additives to tap water like chlorine or fluoride, and ingredients such as corn syrup, seed oils, food dyes, plant-based protein powders, or anything related to soy, and most common food preservatives. These ingredients are listed at the same level of danger as stuff like lead, nicotine, and car exhaust fumes. It's unclear what the ultimate goal or purpose of these supposed Jewish people in power is from the perspective of the people who use this term, other than perhaps to gain even more power. But if these people already are in control of everything, what more is there for them to achieve? This is a pretty major flaw in the G-slop argument. The term then ends up being so effective because it latches onto many other buzzword topics that we've seen pop up lately, especially, such as the fear-mongering of seed oils, processed foods, eating clean, and whether or not fluoride is poisoning us. It's not. None of these things are. Well, except for lead and nicotine and car exhaust fumes, but that's pretty self-explanatory, I think. It's easy to believe the world is out to get you when you lack the education to understand this kind of stuff on a rational level. But many people find it more appealing to succumb to sensationalization rather than the truth, because the truth requires action to change it. Pointing fingers at a group of people and pinning all of your problems on them is easy. It's streamlined, it's straightforward. People prefer straightforwardness even when they know it's counterproductive. We are primed for that in a lot of ways. This term is born out of the premise that in order to progress as a society, we need to reject modern culture. And part of that rejection includes a cleansing of said culture, not just of corn syrup and red dye 40, but of entire communities and ethnicities. Specifically here, that means Jewish people. It's fascism, you guys. Slop is rooted in fascism. I'm sorry I had to be the one to break it to you. But before we move on, I do want to take a minute to discuss the discourse surrounding the other word that makes up the term G-slop. That word that I will not say in this context specifically. And it's not because the word is inherently bad, just like slop wasn't inherently bad before the alt-right got a hold of it. It comes from the derivative of goyim, a Jewish word that can have a couple of different meanings. In biblical Hebrew, it's translated typically as nation, but the most common way that it's used is by a Jewish person in reference to a Gentile or a non-Jewish person. In this context, it's not much different from the many other languages that also have a term for outsiders of their community. It's simply another way to call somebody a foreigner. And as you just heard, since it's not intentionally being used in a derogatory sense, I will say it here. It's not a problematic word, at least from what I've read, but if you are Jewish and you're watching this, please feel free to correct me. It can be argued that there is an exclusionary element to this term. It does technically mean outsider, which interestingly enough, only white people have seemed to take issue with, even though the term refers to anyone who isn't Jewish, not just white people who aren't Jewish. But exclusivity doesn't always equate to something nefarious, especially here. Goyim is a neutral word. How certain people appropriate it is what twists the meaning into harmful rhetoric. Unfortunately, this has happened here and it's been happening for a while. This year specifically, there has been a huge uptick in search queries for this word and its related terms, partly due to the release of the Epstein files in which he uses the word in a derogatory manner multiple times, and also as a result of a viral hour-long video posted by creator Tyler Oliveira, who has over 9 million followers on YouTube, about what he sees as a quote-unquote Jewish invasion flooding the state of New Jersey, followed quickly with a "they tried to silence me" type of response to some of the criticism he was getting. And I bring all of this up to show you that anti-Semitism runs deep. It didn't magically end after World War II like so many of us were taught in school. It never left. It's still here today and it's becoming more and more mainstream by the day. Tyler's video was posted just 2 months ago and it already has over 9 million views. His videos posted a week ago also have similar stats, which means millions of people listened to what he said about Jewish people, and they were okay with it enough to continue watching. They didn't see a problem with it, and that is concerning. It is hard to disentangle how we are using slop now as a trendy pop culture term from these anti-Semitic fascist roots because we aren't removed from that at all. It hasn't yet become history, it's still our present. How exactly are some people attempting to integrate slop into the popular language of today? Well, for one, they chopped off the first part of the term, shortening it to just slop. That seems like a good start. Sometimes other prefixes are included now, such as with AI slop and phrases like corporate slop and slop bowl. While no longer anti-Semitic at face value, the general message of being quote-unquote fed with something of substandard quality, just enough to placate us, still stands. In his Substack essay, Notes on Slop, linguist Adam Alexic, who I mentioned earlier and is also known online as the etymology nerd, defines the slop you're probably most familiar with as, quote, form without content, intended to optimize for mass consumption, which is a simplified phrasing of those definitions from Merriam-Webster and Cambridge dictionaries I mentioned all the way at the beginning of this video. Adam clarifies form as the successful application of a medium and content as the preservation of human intentionality. Using posting to YouTube as an example, form would be like the packaging of a video. The title and thumbnail are chosen to pique your curiosity enough to click. A successful application of form means lots of people are drawn to your video. The depth of your content, the message you are sharing in that video, is what keeps people engaged after they click. You've drawn them into this novel thing. Now, what do you actually have to say about it? Managing that balance between form and content can be tricky. Lean too far toward form and there's no longevity in the media created. Prioritize solely the content of what you're creating, and a decent amount of views is all but out of the picture. Thus, a spectrum is born out of this constant tension between figuring out how to use the form to express meaningful content. Adam shows us with what he's calling the slop spectrum. Now, the issue I have with the spectrum as it currently stands is that it refers to both artificially generated and human-made media as slop, even going so far as to put individual people as dots on that spectrum. Personally, I don't agree with referring to human-made projects as slop, no matter how low quality we perceive them to be, even if you are just using that term as a way to try and shame others out of making or engaging in what you perceive to be as bottom-of-the-barrel content. I also think calling human-made work slop alongside generated AI conflates the two, which I don't believe is helpful long-term. People have always made quote-unquote bad art. Bad art is allowed to exist. It's often the stepping stone for someone to learn to make great art. The problem then lies in how algorithms choose to reward poor quality content over and over high quality content, because algorithms are trained to respond to engagement over the actual content it pushes out onto all of our feeds. That's why we've seen clickbait tactics morph into extreme rage bait over the past decade especially. But even then, I'd much rather watch the real Mr. Beast over an artificially generated version of him. I mean, I don't want to watch Mr. Beast videos at all, but if this was my only choice, then I'd prefer knowing at least another person was on the other side of that screen. I don't think placing Hallmark movies and pulp magazines so close to Italian brain rot and AI shrimp Jesus is productive. Pulp magazines in particular, I know they have their time and place for critique, but at least they were providing work for writers, stenographers, typists, editors, and artists. And they were a place for writers to begin their career as authors, like Upton St. Clair, for example, before he went on to write The Jungle, his book that exposed the American meatpacking industry, which then led to reforms and legislation. He supported himself by writing dime novels and writing for pulp magazines. When we call both of these slop, we're saying that one is no better than the other, and I just don't think that's true. I do somewhat appreciate Adam and this New York Times article that he's also quoted in mentioning slop's 4chan history, because many articles don't touch on it at all. But in my opinion, it's still being glossed over as a blip, a footnote, something of the past, in order to continue pushing for this evolved iteration of slop. I mean, the New York Times article refers to everything I just told you about G-slop and how it's still being used to this day to push for an ethnic cleansing agenda as, quote, anonymous posters sometimes projecting proficiency in complex subject matter with in-group language. Calling blatant anti-Semitism complex subject matter and appropriated derogatory terms in-group language used sometimes dilutes the seriousness of what is happening on these posting board sites that can and does translate into real-life harm. As I was researching for this video, I became simultaneously hyper-aware and uncomfortable with just how often I was coming across slop or one of its offshoots being used so flippantly in YouTube and TikTok videos, thumbnails, and comment sections. And it's not restricted to pointing out generative AI either. It's being used to describe anything because no matter how much we pretend to hate it, slop is trendy right now. And I'm not absolved from this either. I probably wouldn't have even really sat down to talk about this if I hadn't been inundated with slop this and slop that all over social media. And if I didn't think slop wasn't going to be a clickable term. But at least I'm trying to make some meaningful content out of it. I'm trying to strike a balance on that form versus content graph, that slop spectrum. If we look at the word slop outside of any societal or cultural context, it seems harmless. Maybe even a little silly to be making a 30-minute video about. But that's not how words work. No matter how far removed from that original source material and that darker co-opted derailment we might want to believe that they are. And in many instances, this harmless disposition is by design, as a way to subtly expand the reach of propaganda, defamatory rhetoric, and extremist ideals that in current times are typically viewed as controversial subjects. Over time, we've seen the same phenomenon happen with a lot of memes as well. It's an unfortunately clever way to slowly warm the public back up to the idea of continuing to normalize bigotry by reintroducing them to it with shiny, updated packaging through popular culture and trendy slang. Most people, I would say, especially on the internet, want to be perceived as a little cool and in the know, but at what cost? I want to make it clear that I am not suggesting any of this pushing of bigotry and extremist ideals is unique, never been done before. We live in a post-colonial world, none of this is new, it's just attempting to take on a new form in order to persist. The people who perpetuate these ideologies are like parasites, constantly looking for new minds, young minds in particular, to latch onto and to feed off of, aka profit off of. And this ultimately ends up hurting all of us, not just the marginalized communities targeted, because in a world full of systemic barriers and intentional class systems, you and I are more alike than any billionaire or rich politician. But all of this leads me, and perhaps you too, to circle back to the questions I posed earlier. Should we be pushing so hard for the adoption of a word with such violent origins? Probably not. And regardless of if it's right or wrong to use this word, is it already too late to remove slop from the everyday person's vocabulary? Probably yes. I also feel like we are ending with even more questions than what we began with, namely, who has the time to be searching up every new phrase that pops up on Twitter or TikTok or any other social media platform? Should we even have to be doing any of that? How can we try our best to stay informed without letting it consume us? Is an informed person using the word slop really any better than an ignorant person using it? I want to be realistic here. I don't think it's useful for me to conclude this by saying never use the word slop again, and if you do, you're evil. That would also be pretty hypocritical of me, considering I said slop like a million times in here. I didn't make this video to incite you to feel self-righteous or to feel like you need to go and harass every creator you can find that calls something slop. I made this to educate you and myself, to empower us to be able to make better decisions about what words we add to our vocabularies, how we use them, and when we use them. Maybe the solution is not to remove the word from our cultural lexicon, again, that's probably unrealistic at this point, but rather to use it with intentionality. Because right now, I feel like we are throwing around the label slop too often and too enthusiastically. Not everything you dislike means it's slop. It's okay to say something's not to your personal taste. It's okay to not enjoy something simply because you don't enjoy it. That doesn't mean it's bad. That doesn't mean there has to be some big grand reason. And if you are going to coin something a slop, make sure you actually understand what you mean when you say that word. I'd love it if you liked and subscribed to the channel. Like I said at the beginning of this video, over here at Salted Latte, I love to dive into and dissect language and prose through mostly books, but really all sorts of mediums, anything I'm interested in at the moment. I know this video, again, is a little different than what I normally make, but I really enjoyed researching and putting together the script for this, so let me know if there are any other online terms or phrases you'd like me to look into. But that's all I have to say for now. I will talk to you all soon. Goodbye.